It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Gary Hirshberg. Gary Hirshberg is chairman of Stonyfield Farms, the world's leading organic yogurt producer, and managing director of Stonyfield Europe. He is also the chairman and founding partner of Just Label It, We Have the Right to Know, the national campaign to label genetically engineered foods. He is co-author of Label It Now, What You Need to Know About Genetically Engineered Foods. Gary has received 12 honorary doctorates and numerous awards for corporate and environmental leadership, including a 2012 Lifetime Achievement Award by the US EPA. We are so fortunate to have Gary here today to share with us his thoughts on how doing the right thing is not only what's best for consumers, but can be what's best for your bottom line. Without further ado, please help me welcome to the stage Gary Hirshberg.
I must be old, I shaved. Let me add my congratulations to Ben and also my deep sense of honor being here. As Ben said, I must admit when Woolsey Conover called and said, would I come? I don't know how many of you know Woolsey, but you just don't say no to him. So that was easy. But I didn't know that much about this organization, and I'm inspired as well. I want to share today my story, the Stonyfield story, about growing a business and a mission simultaneously, and about the role and the sort of synergistic role that the mission has played in our evolution, and of course our philanthropic and political initiatives that have resulted. Just by way of background, I actually was down here in Mass in the 70s running a little ecological research institute on Cape Cod called the New Alchemy Institute. Some of you may have heard of it. We were doing year-round growing of solar, totally solar enclosed environments where we could feed in a room 1/5 the size of this. We could feed 10 families 3 meals a day, 365 days a year, using no fossil fuels, no pesticides, no herbicides, no fertilizers, and of course heating it with the sun. And it was very exciting work, and I was quite proud of it. When Ronald Reagan came into office, one of the first things he did was slash funding for renewable energy, organic farming, and so forth. So we found ourselves a very needy nonprofit with most of the not only the federal support gone, but the then subsequent tightening of private support, because folks who had been dependent on federal money for research or whatever were now racing to groups like this, to foundations. And in the middle of all that, I visited my mother, who was the senior buyer at the Epcot Center in Florida. I don't know how many of you have been down there. But at the Epcot Center, Kraft Foods at the time had funded a food pavilion showing how food should be grown in the future. And you might imagine it had a slightly different sort of message than mine. It was basically, you know, buy the Velveeta, leave the food growing to us. Literally, there was an exhibit where you went through and there were cows dancing, singing, DDT is good for me. So to make a long story short, I became kind of aware of my impotence as a nonprofit out there. I had 25,000 people visiting me per year, but 25,000 people were paying to go there every single day. But even more importantly, all the work I was doing to promote sustainable food production, less toxins and so forth, became very, very clear to me that we essentially have these fundamental myths underlying our modern way of living. We have the myth of away, that place that we send all of our waste. You know, where's it go? It goes away. Well, we now know with climate change, there is no away. Once you send that CO2 up, we're all dealing with it. We have the myth of externalities, those consequences of our everyday behaviors that we don't account for on our income statement or our balance sheet, but they're still there, yet we don't measure them. We have the myth of cheap food, that cheap food is somehow acceptable, when in fact most of what we eat and buy, not what's in your, at your table today, but most of it is not even food. And in short, I came to realize that sustainability, what I was working on, was not just about what we do, it was really how we think, that there were sort of deep fundamental flaws in our modern way of thinking. And the classic example of this, and I I say this with hesitation. This is a very positive meeting, and I want to say right off that I'm not the most depressing guy you've ever met. But I do need to say that the classic example of this is what we do with pesticides and toxins in our everyday life. So bear with me for a second. I mean, we've essentially been profoundly reckless in our 70-year spree with toxic chemicals, especially with modern farming. We don't even think about this externality, this consequence. But the President's Cancer Panel now tells us that 41% of Americans alive today, nearly 1 in 2, is going to be diagnosed with cancer in our lifetimes. And when Ronald Reagan convened that panel in the early 1980s, that number was 20%. So in one generation, essentially, by the time this report came out 10 years ago, in one generation, we've doubled the percentage of cancer. Just to put that in context, it's 1 in 3 women, 1 in 2 men. And the President's Cancer Panel, who reported out to the President on this, are not a bunch of folks who walk around in Birkenstocks. Well, they may walk around in Birkenstocks, but they weren't, these were oncologists, not ecologists. These were folks who were just looking at the statistics. And what they said with this report, their report to the President, was urging the President to do everything in his power to use the agencies to help Americans avoid inadvertent exposure to toxins in our everyday life. The fire retardants, the chemicals, the cosmetics that we put on our skin, the largest organ in our body. And yet, as you can see, the investment in this kind of infrastructure has gone on and on and on. And all of us are victims to a way of thinking where we just have not made the unconscious conscious. In my world, people often say organic is a nice idea, but it's not really proven. But I would submit to you that it's actually the chemicals that are not proven, except that we're starting to get the data now, and it's not good. We're exposed every day to 100,000 man-made chemicals in our everyday life. Nobody has seriously looked at the synergistic impacts. Nobody's looked at the cumulative impacts, and we definitely don't look at the impacts on children at the time of maximum cell growth. We have no idea what are the safe thresholds, because any chemicals we do test are tested on us older folks when our bodies have developed or are going the other way. So the bottom line here is that the CDC has identified an average of about 148 chemicals in our bodies. Now, again, I'm sorry to be hitting you with this depressing news. But the bottom line is that this is very serious stuff. And so this is why we started Stonyfield. I, number one, did not want to be dependent on philanthropy, nor did I want to be dependent on the federal government. And I wanted to set out and see if we could prove that a business could be part of the solution as well as profitable and successful. And I want to say that I really relate to this foundation because it was 9 years of, you have to understand, when we started an organic yogurt company in 1983, no one knew what we were talking about, right? No one was eating yogurt, and nobody knew what organic meant. So, I often say we had a wonderful company, just no supply and no demand. And of course, it was not, about making money alone, although we knew that we needed to prove that you could make money working on the solutions for this mission to have any effect. So we set out to prove a business model, a model that, like you're celebrating today, that we could make more money, we could build farmers' incomes, we could, essentially a model where everybody could win. And so as I started to say, with that as a mission and a lot of naivete, it was 9 years before we made money. 9 years. So of course, as you can imagine, lots of investors coming to us, except no institutional investors would even give us the time of day. I mean, I would sit with venture capitalists literally with their feet up on the table. One even clipped his fingernails during our meeting. I mean, they just thought we were kind of a joke. And of course, my venture capitalist wound up being, my mother, my mother-in-law. I literally had a moment in the 1984 where our bedroom was about 50 feet from our office, which was about 80 feet from the cows. And I always had this horrible Wednesday night because I had to meet payroll the next morning, a $3,500 payroll, and we never had cash. So I distinctly can tell you this happened multiple times. Thinking my wife was asleep over here, because we went to bed early, we had to milk cows and so on. I would tiptoe over to the office to call her mother to see if I could borrow $1,000 to help meet payroll. And I would hear the click, click of call waiting as my wife on the other line said, Mom, don't do this. I mean, it was a nightmare, okay? I'll just leave it at that. We had no idea what we were doing. And so, you know, as I know this is an organization that, thanks to Woolsey and others here, got started some time ago, 28 years ago. 1993 you founded, I think. But I can tell you, 20, whatever that is, 22, 23, whatever it is, the point is that this is clearly, from the turnout today, an organization that is hitting its stride. And as you could see in the video, you know, this is an organization whose time has come. And so having you all here to celebrate and grow and follow the leaders who've laid this foundation and just basically sticking with it is I think such a critical thing to be celebrating. In my view, looking back at our 30 years, especially those first 9, I can tell you determination was the most critical, undervalued, but essential ingredient to success. And you just heard great examples of that with Ben. But today, looking back, you know, we're now a $400 million company. We support 2,000 family farmers, all of whom are making more money than they would if they were non-organic, supporting many wonderful businesses, including one of your board members, Roland Hoeks, and Global Organics, and plenty of others. Organics, my sector, is now a $40 billion sector. It's where all the growth is in food. Conventional food is actually flat or shrinking. All the growth is either non-GMO or organic. You may not realize that organic is now 5% of U.S. food. Actually, carrots, it's 22% of U.S. carrots. But the important thing that you need to understand, and what will get me back to the point of why we're here today, is you have to understand the financial equation that we solved. And I'm speaking now directly to all of you in business who obviously have enough to do just to every day get up and keep your balance sheet healthy and get your job done. Our equation was real simple. To get on the supermarket shelf and stay on that shelf, our product had to be better than anything that was out there. If it was the same, we would lose, because other well-established companies, little competitors like General Mills and Kraft and Nabisco, and you know, you've probably heard some of these names, you know, they're just going to knock us off with their deeper pockets. So for us, it had to be far, far better. That meant in a very fundamental way, much higher cost of goods, much lower gross margins. And I can just tell you right now, our gross margins are 10 points worse than our competitors, 1,000 basis points worse. So when it leaves the back of my factory, I'm already at a 10-point deficit to my competitors. And at the same time, I can also tell you that my net margins at the bottom line are the same as theirs. So somewhere between the gross margin and the net margin, I've made it up. Well, how have I made it up? It's obvious to the business people here. By not spending money on classic advertising. We never had the money, so that was a good thing that we didn't set that as a goal. It meant that we really had to find other ways to communicate, and you can probably see where I'm going. For us, our mission and our philanthropy, the things that we stood for, the reasons that we formed in business, became our means of communication, became our way of bonding, what I call building the handshake with the consumer. And while we started it out of necessity, even later, as we got more successful and we actually had money, we've never advertised, because we found that by engaging the consumer in an actual everyday dialogue about things important, I mean, what mother does not want to avoid toxins for her children, right? I mean, we would make jokes, you know, our yogurts have more live and active cultures than most of the other yogurts out there, which means that you have multiple organisms with every bite. You know, we would have, you know, lots of fun with our product, and we'd be self-deprecating, and I have screwed that line up more than once. But the point is that, you know, from the very outset, we set out to communicate what we were for, and have discovered in hindsight that our mission actually became the currency that made us possible. Now, you have to understand, again, the very beginning, we were clueless. I mentioned we were milking cows. We started with 7 cows. One night, the head buyer of the Demoulas Market Basket chain called us at the over at the farmhouse and said, we were selling to one of his competitors who had 1 store. And he had 35, and he said, well, why are you selling to my competitor and not to me? And we said, we don't have enough cows. And he said, well, get some more goddamn cows. And he slammed the phone down. We took that advice. So we grew our herd to 19 cows, a real whopper. Shortly thereafter, you may remember the early 80s when we set out, the Iranian hostage crisis dominated the news. And we had an Iranian refugee who had resettled in Milford, New Hampshire, next to us. And she made her way up to the hill one night and said, you know, Mr. Kamen, my partner, Mr. Hirshberg, I have to tell you, your yogurt is the best thing I've had since coming from the old country. And of course, they know a little bit about yogurt. In Iran, they've been eating it for like 6,000 years. And she said, I've got a great marketing suggestion for you. And this is, of course, Ayatollah Khomeini's on the front page of every newspaper. She said, you ought to market this as a taste of Iran. We did not take that advice. But we knew that we had a better product. And so I always say we can ship the yogurt 3,000 miles, but it's the last 18 inches that makes all the difference. We've just got to get it from the cup into people's mouths. And that's what we did. And so at every anti-nuclear rally, at every road race for breast cancer, at every, you know, many of you probably sampled our yogurts at the Bonnie Bell, Tufts, 10K road races and so forth. And this began to build a kind of a culture, a word-of-mouth culture, because people were saying, hey, this company's trying to actually do something, not just produce good stuff. This mission idea really crescendoed one day when some of you who've been around a while might remember the Joe and Andy show on WROR. This was the early morning shock jocks. Joe was this tall runner. He ran in the marathon, and Andy was, let's just say the opposite. Andy used to brag about how many donuts he could eat in a sitting. And Joe one day, Andy on the air, Joe was eating one of our yogurts, and Andy said, what's that you're eating? And Joe said, well, this is this incredible new organic yogurt from New Hampshire. They're doing great things in the world. They're supporting all these causes. You really ought to eat yogurt. And Andy said, I'd rather eat camel manure than yogurt. So down the road from us in New Hampshire was Benson's Animal Farm, which had camels. So again, you can probably see where this is going. We brought Joe a quart of yogurt early one morning, and my wife and I went over with an empty quart to Benson's and loaded up some frozen camel nuggets, filled them up. By the time we got to WROR's studio near Fenway Park, the manure had melted and thawed, and the top of the container was kind of domed from the gases that had built up. We got into the reception office, and she said, may I help you? I said, yes, we're here to give breakfast to Joe and Andy. And she said, well, you don't think you can just walk in here? And I said, well, I've got to do something with this. And I cracked it, and the vapors filled, and she buzzed me through. Anyhow, to make a long story short, we got our first celebrity endorsement. We got Andy to agree that our yogurt did taste better than camel shit, which was fantastic. So the mission got us in the doors, got us free press. We went then to see, my mom was in Newton, had grown up in Newton. They were next door neighbors with the Raab family. My grandfather was actually the banker of Stop and Shop, so I used the kind of Jewish mafia to get in for an appointment at Stop and Shop. I went to see Avram Goldberg, and he sent me on to his buyer. The buyer at Stop and Shop said, well, you can come in here, but you got to have some kind of, what's your advertising plan? And we, of course, had no advertising plan. But we came up with a scheme on the spot. We knew the one thing, we didn't have money, but we had cows. So we decided to put cows up for adoption. And what would happen is you could send in 5 yogurt lids. You would get a certificate naming you the co-owner of one of the cows. You would get a photograph of your cow. And then in those days, before email, you would get 2 letters a year from your cow. And these cows were extremely smart. They would talk about all the causes we cared about. They would talk about pesticides and herbicides. And we wound up with 25,000, 30,000 people adopting cows just in the metro area here. Joan Rivers adopted a cow live on national television, and so forth. And again, you know, we used a little bit of ingenuity. We used our means, which were limited, to talk about the causes that we cared about. And we started to build this, you know, fantastic network. The Boston Globe wrote an editorial about adopting a cow and what's going on with family farmers and so forth. So I could, believe me, talk for hours about these early stories. Let me jump to the second phase, which I think is going to get us close to where you all are at, which is sort of from 1992, once we were making money, to the present, where we've, again, grown to this $400 million size. We've become the number, depending on the week, 3 or 4 yogurt brand in the country. And again, through this period, it hasn't just been about what we talk about. It's been what we do. And what we do has given us something to talk about and has given us the bond. So whether it's creating a waste treatment plant, you know, I had to build a waste treatment plant because I produce a lot of biological waste. I knew that the kind of system that they were talking about that we had to build would produce a truckload of sludge every single day that had to go somewhere, to that mythological place called Away again. Actually, the locals, when we asked the town, what do we do with the sludge if we build one of these plants, they said, oh, it's really easy. You send it to Vermont, which was their definition of Away. Of course, I knew Ben & Jerry's was producing waste, so I was figuring, you know, we could swap sludge on the Connecticut River and have a sludge fest or something. But so instead, we built a plant that produces almost no sludge. 1 truckload every 5 years. It produces energy that we can use to run our facility, both heat and electricity. Dramatic reductions in water use, and actually, by the way, extremely profitable to us. Payback was very quick because we're not transporting sludge all over the place. So whether it was that or coming up with a toolkit to measure our carbon footprint and showing other businesses how to do that and talking about that stuff, reducing our packaging, going to the first plant-based polymer in cups, or going with organics, of course, which is a central part of our mission, which is, you know, dramatically reducing the amount of toxins that are out there. All of this became the kind of currency for our marketing, for our communication. And to do that, we became more sophisticated. We started using our lids, the top of the packaging. And this was really odd in the marketplace because we would actually talk about causes. We'd talk about real stuff. So whether it was breast cancer or what have you. It was really, to be honest, it was, and as social media came in and we were using our lids to grab people, and we have, Stonyfield has millions of people now on our Facebook and our various social media pages. And it began with the yogurt tops because that was a piece of media that everybody saw. That was our means of contact. You should know it was not a flawless exercise. When Nancy Pelosi became the House Majority Leader and started demanding organic food on Capitol Hill, we rushed our yogurt cups down there. The problem is once a year I use a lid to rant about one of my favorite causes, which is campaign finance reform. And it happened that that particular week our lids said, in politics, the cream doesn't always rise to the top, which was our way of saying you shouldn't have to be a millionaire to run for office, but we picked a bad week. So what was very funny is they sent back, our very first shipment, they sent it back with a note that said, your yogurt, the yogurt's fine, but the lids aren't. They're too political for Capitol Hill. I love that line. But in any case, we did get it back the following week with, you know, the cleaned up lids. But we began saluting as we opened up cities around the country, we knew that people who ride the train every day, who may think they're just getting to work, are actually heroes, because by not using a car, they're avoiding 45 pounds of particulate going into the atmosphere. So we would greet consumers in Chicago and in Texas, they don't believe in trains, or at least passenger trains, but we would meet and greet consumers at bus stops and so forth, hand them a yogurt, hand them a spoon, hand them a coupon, and talk about and make them feel good about the choice they made to take public transit that day. We developed something called YoTube, our version of YouTube, where we actually invited people to come on the farm and visit the sugar and the milk and the fruit operations and see what we were doing. You get the gist. We used our business and the things we were doing every day to just build that bridge, and we even created something called the Farm Cam, which was literally a camera that sat on the farm, and you could tune in and watch cows chewing cud. I know that may not seem super exciting. But, you know, again, this was a way of building. And understand, and I think you probably do, that this is not just building top line. This is building loyalty. Because the net result, when you bond with a company over a cause, or you support a company because of the cause that they've taken on, you build the most powerful bond there is, which is word of mouth. Word of mouth is you earn that, right? It's an emotional reaction. And with word of mouth, loyalty with word of mouth comes, you know, you're going to be more influenced by the person sitting next to you about a purchase than you are by some ad you see on TV by some overpaid celebrity who you know is just shilling for this that day. But when people are talking about saying, you ought to eat this yogurt, that works. And of course, our philanthropy also came into a big, big part of our work. We created something called the Profits for the Planet program, by which 10% of our profits would go to causes. obviously, the causes were meant to also be self-promotional. And I want to be very upfront with you and very direct and very assertive that when we invited causes to apply to us for support, one of the questions on the list was, how will supporting you help us? We were not bashful about saying that because we knew this had to be part of our marketing. And you've just heard wonderful examples from Ben. You know, it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to serve. But why not? Why not have it serve your mission as well? Because why not grow the tree instead of cutting off the limb, right? As you grow your own business by building better goodwill and having people talk about whether it's putting you in programs or on their websites or whatever, then you're creating more dollars that you can put into more causes. And so we supported Living on Earth on public radio, which is a brilliant environmental news journal, but also got our attention to an audience who clearly we wanted to reach. We supported Kratz Creatures for those who had kids on PBS. We supported an organic farm at the University of New Hampshire that was doing research on organics, but also was growing the next generation of young farmers. Millennials are all interested in this space. The Chefs Collaborative is a national group of chefs dedicated to doing good. We created locator cards that you could download that would allow you to find, if you show up in Cincinnati, find a sustainable cuisine restaurant. So again, this was, you know, you win, I win. Right now we're funding a organic farmer training school in Maine. And so again, philanthropy was absolutely an integral and critical and essential part of our mission, as it is with this wonderful organization. And this really leads me to the last part of what I want to share with you, which is what I'm doing now. Because in fact, our philanthropy became very serious for us. And our whole focus, when I discovered, as you heard in the introduction, what is going on with genetically engineered foods in this country. And again, I won't go into great detail. I've already depressed you enough with my earlier statistics. But you should know that while we talk generally about genetically engineered foods as being necessary to feed the world and a toolbox we need to have, a tool we need to have in our toolbox, and all that is true. We're going to have 9.2 billion people here in 2050. The reality, though, however, in the U.S. is that over 90% of the genetically engineered crops that are in the marketplace have been engineered to make crops more herbicide tolerant. That is to say, to make them so that they can withstand us dumping whatever amount of toxins we want on them without them adversely affecting the plants. And this is should not be surprising because the chemical companies who've rebranded themselves as biotech companies, Monsanto, Dow, DuPont, they make a lot of money on the chemicals. This is an extraordinarily profitable model. They sell patented seeds that require more chemical use. The gross margins on those chemicals are through the roof. This is why this industry has been able to spend hundreds of millions of dollars lobbying to defeat regulation to stop them. But for me, I'm not anti-GMO. I just want it to be used for good purposes, and I don't think that we should be encouraging the use of more chemicals and exposing us. Just so you have a sense of what's gone on here. In 1996, we used 14 million pounds of glyphosate. You would know it as Roundup in this country. Last year, we used 280 million pounds. If you're in Iowa or any Midwestern state, and we're all downwind from all of them, 60 to 100% of the rainfall now contains these herbicides. And the World Health Organization's leading cancer panel just declared glyphosate, which was supposed to be the benign herbicide, as a probable carcinogen. So I'll just put this in simple terms. 60 to 100% of the rainfall in the Midwest, if you're pregnant, if you're a young child playing in a field with your soccer ball, 60 to 100% of your rainfall now contains probable carcinogens as a result of genetically engineered foods. Okay, that's what's going on here. So, and the problem with what I just described to you is that you and I have had no say in it at all because unlike citizens in 64 other nations around the world, we don't have it on our label. So we can't vote. This has been a brilliant mechanism by the chemical companies to get this through without us having say. Really progressive countries like Russia and China give their citizens, you know, the rights to vote by having 2 words in the ingredient panel, not a skull and crossbones, just 2 simple words. So our major philanthropy these days has been the organization that, in fact, I founded called Just Label It. And I've become the chairman of Stonyfield, not the CEO, so I could dedicate myself full-time to this work because, again, we're not trying to, we want it to be factual. We don't want to disparage GMOs, but we want consumers, we want the marketplace to work, and we want consumers to be able to vote. We want people to be able to have a say. And I've literally just testified at the Senate 2 days ago, and I must tell you, I believe we're probably going to win this thing. And the reason we're going to win it is very simple. You have the right to know. That is an unassailable fact. There are two unassailable facts here. One is these compounds have led, these crops have led to more herbicide use, and the second is you have the right to know. And you can say whatever else you want to say, but that, in our nation, that is true. And so let me wrap this up by tying these strands together and bring it back to the foundation for MetroWest. I mean, for us, I hope I've persuaded you that our philanthropy, our association with causes has been an absolutely critical part of our success. I would not be standing here were it not for that dedication. And I encourage you, just as you've given time this morning to support this organization and be here, I encourage you to think that through in your business. It's far more profitable, far more beneficial to your business. And you just heard a great example from Ben. It's great for employee enthusiasm and retention. When employees are applying to Stonyfield, that's one of the key factors. They say, I want to be a part, I want to do meaningful work. Yes, salary is important, benefits are important. I want to do meaningful work. I want to go back to my kids at night and say, yeah, I did something good today. And look them in the eye if you do get home for dinner. For me, this notion of corporate mission all being the same, it is all one and the same, and I hope I've made that case. But the philanthropic aspect of this cannot begin to be overstated how important it is. I mean, the reality is we got a world with a lot of problems. And frankly, the fact that we're all able to take the time this morning to give of ourselves, to have time, means that we are of the privileged few in this world. And therefore, I would submit, as Ben suggested, we have an obligation to give back. This isn't just a good thing to do and a very good thing to do for your business, but the world actually needs us. Stonyfield has created a model that has proven more than just that you can make good yogurt. It's win, 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 win. I mean, organics is preventative health care. The cheapest form of health care is not getting sick in the first place, right? If you're treating cancer after you're sick, that's the most expensive time. Organics promotes brain development. We now know that when young children aren't exposed to pesticides, they have actually higher IQ. This is clinical evidence. Organic promotes carbon sequestration. It takes carbon out of the air, puts it in the ground. Biodiversity, national and global security, less oil being needed, less chemicals out there, economic development, so on and so forth. So we are proud of our mission. We're proud of the central part of what we do, and philanthropy is certainly an expression of it. But the bottom line is that pick your cause. You know, you've heard mine, and you've heard probably more than you wanted to hear about the pesticide issue. But pick your cause. It doesn't matter what it is. You've seen in this wonderful video, you know, a plethora of needs right here, right outside this door. I will tell you that there have been, in my experience, no negatives in choosing to associate ourselves with causes. In fact, the upsides have been unlimited. You know, businesses, despite the Citizens United finding, businesses are not people. We have special privileges. We have special abilities. We have special resources. We have concentrations of smart people. We have a balance sheet. We have visibility. We have stature. We have credibility in the community. We're job creators. We have an unusual position from which to contribute to something, whatever that cause is. You can make far more of a difference through business, I think, than through almost any other endeavor. And I'll just end with my favorite quote, which I think says it all. Gandhi said, anyone who thinks they're too small to make a difference has never been in bed with a mosquito. And, you know, we know all about mosquitoes in New Hampshire. I think it's our state bird. But seriously, you know, that says it all. We have immense powers here. I thank you for coming today. I thank you for supporting this amazing organization. Honestly, I'm honored by the invitation and delighted I could spend some time with you. And I urge all of us together, we can do incredible things, and this organization is one spectacular way to organize ourselves. So thank you so much for listening to me.